January in the city. The kind of cold that turned breath into ghosts and made the homeless huddle over subway grates. Outside the Drake townhouse, camera flashes popped like small explosions. Inside, the kitchen smelled like burnt espresso and fresh-cut lilies, expensive and wrong. Lorelei Winters stood by the marble island in her catering blacks, watching through the doorway as 20 children in designer coats abandoned Julian Drake's 8th birthday party early. The boy sat alone at the head of a table piled with untouched cake, his honey-brown eyes fixed on nothing. When the clown tried one last time to engage him, the silence turned sharp. Parents checked phones, kids whispered. By 3 o'clock, half the guests were gone. By 9 that night, the video was trending. Millionaire's silent heir, still no words at 8. 2 million views by Monday morning. But Lorelei had seen something else. While the adults looked away and the cameras filmed his stillness, Julian's fingers had moved against the table edge. Tap, tap, pause, tap. Keeping perfect time with the bass line nobody was dancing to. Not random, not meaningless. The richest boy in the city had everything, except the one person who'd see what he was trying to say. The kitchen smelled like burnt coffee and Marin's regret. She'd over-roasted the beans trying to get the espresso machine to work. Cassian liked it a specific way, and the new machine had 17 settings she hadn't memorized yet. Her niece, Lorelei, sat at the far end of the marble island doing homework before school, her worn backpack slumped against the copper pot rack. Cassian Drake stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows staring at the city waking up below. His tailored suit was perfect, his hair graying at the temples in that distinguished way wealthy men wore like badges. But his shoulders were tight, his jaw clenched. The laptop on the counter glowed with the email he'd been reading since 5 in the morning. From Hospital Board Executive Committee, Subject Drake Pediatric Wing, Urgent Review, Date January 18th, 11:47 p.m. Marin cleared her throat softly. Mr. Drake, your eggs are ready. Should I plate them? He didn't turn. How many, Marin? Sir? Specialists. Doctors. Audiologists. How many have we tried now? Marin's hands stilled on the espresso cup. Everyone in this house knew the number. 27, sir. 27. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. $50 million donated to that hospital wing, Drake Center for Pediatric Miracles. And my own son, his voice cracked. He stopped himself. From the doorway leading to the service stairs, Julian appeared. 8 years old, small for his age, wearing pajamas too expensive to wrinkle. His honey-brown eyes were open but unfocused, seeing nothing. He moved carefully, one hand trailing the wall, navigating by memory. Nobody spoke to him, nobody touched him. He was treated like something fragile, something that might shatter if handled wrong. Julian reached the table and found his chair, sat down. Marin placed scrambled eggs in front of him, adjusted his fork to the right position. He didn't acknowledge her. 27, Cassian repeated, still staring out the window. And they want a miracle by April 15th. Lorelei's hand moved unconsciously to her backpack, where yesterday's napkin was folded in the front pocket, the one with Julian's tapping pattern drawn in spilled juice. She'd studied it last night under her desk lamp, noticing how the rhythm matched the bass line from the birthday song. 4 beats, pause, 3 beats, repeat, not random. Mr. Drake, Marin said carefully, Julian's doctors have always said, I know what they've said. Cassian finally turned, his face drawn, that he's profoundly deaf with co-occurring developmental delays, that cochlear implants won't work, that he may never speak. I've heard it 27 times. He grabbed his briefcase. The leather strap made a soft slap against the marble. I need to go. Meeting with the hospital's PR team at 9. He walked past Julian without touching him, without saying goodbye. The door closed. The elevator hummed somewhere deep in the house. And, in the silence that followed, Lorelei watched Julian's fingers tap the table edge. The same rhythm from yesterday, the same pattern on her napkin. Nobody else heard it, but she did. The soundproof booth smelled like antiseptic and old carpet. Dr. Imani Okafor had been in this room with Julian Drake 6 times in the past 4 months, adjusting settings on the rejected cochlear implant, running frequency tests, watching the audiogram flatline over and over. 27 specialists before her, she was number 28. Julian sat in the testing chair wearing oversized headphones that made him look even younger. His eyes stared at the wall. Dr. Okafor pressed the button to send a pure tone through the headphones. 500 Hz, moderate volume, nothing, no flinch, no turn of the head. She increased the volume, then again, then to levels that would make a hearing person wince. Julian's expression didn't change. Through the observation window, Cassian Drake stood with arms crossed, jaw tight. Beside him, a nurse checked her tablet, documenting the failure in real time. Dr. Okafor removed the headphones gently. Julian didn't react to that either. Didn't seem to notice they'd been removed. She made notes on her clipboard. No behavioral response to auditory stimuli at any frequency or volume. Cochlear implant site shows no infection but zero functional integration. She paused. Recommend what? She'd already recommended everything. Speech therapy. He wouldn't engage. Behavioral therapy. No progress. Alternative communication devices? He ignored them. The file on her desk was 3 inches thick with failed interventions. Cassian entered the booth. The door seal hissed. Well? Dr. Okafor chose her words carefully. Mr. Drake, I've adjusted every parameter available within the implant's range. Julian is not responding to sound transmission through the cochlear nerve pathway. The device is functioning mechanically, but there's no evidence of auditory processing. His brain isn't interpreting the signals as sound. Then fix it. Sir, I don't... She stopped herself. 27 specialists had tried. 27 had failed. What made her think she'd be different? I'll review the literature again. Perhaps there's a new protocol. I don't need literature. I need results. By April 15th. He left without another word. The nurse followed. The soundproof door sealed again with a soft hiss, leaving Dr. Okafor alone with Julian. She looked at the boy, so small, so still, so unreachable, and then she noticed something. Julian's hand rested on the armrest of the testing chair, and his fingers were moving, tapping lightly, rhythmically, against the leather. Tap, tap, pause, tap. Dr. Okafor leaned closer. The pattern was consistent, not random twitching, not stimming, rhythm. She picked up her pen and wrote in the margin of her notes. What if we're testing the wrong sense? She underlined it, then crossed it out, too speculative, too unscientific for a clinical report. But the question wouldn't leave her. What sense could a deaf child be using that nobody had thought to test? Lorelei was humming while she dried dishes, something her grandmother used to do, a wordless melody that felt like home. Marin washed, Lorelei dried, and between them was the comfortable rhythm of family work. The kitchen smelled like dish soap and the remnants of Julian's untouched dinner. Julian sat at the table, supposedly eating, but his fork hadn't moved in 10 minutes. His eyes were unfocused, staring at nothing. But his head had turned slightly toward Lorelei's humming. Marin noticed. She always noticed everything about Julian. The boy she'd helped raise since his mother left 2 years ago. The boy Cassian loved, but couldn't reach. Lorelei, Marin said quietly, can you hum that again? Lorelei glanced at her aunt, confused, but hummed the melody again, rising and falling, simple and sweet. Julian's head turned more, not toward the sound exactly, but toward something. His fingers tapped the table. Tap, tap, pause, tap, matching the rhythm of Lorelei's humming. Aunt Marin, is he... Shh, keep going. Lorelei hummed louder, letting the melody fill the kitchen. The vibration of her voice seemed to hang in the air, and Julian's tapping grew more confident, more precise, not random. Not meaningless, he was responding. Marin's hands stilled in the soapy water. She'd seen 27 specialists work with Julian. She'd watched them fail with increasingly expensive equipment, but this, her 11-year-old niece humming a grandmother's lullaby, was getting a response. Lorelei, you can't tell Mr. Drake about this. What? Why not? Marin dried her hands slowly, choosing her words carefully. Because if he knows you're connecting with Julian somehow, he'll either want to formalize it, hire you, study you, turn it into another treatment protocol, or he'll forbid it because you're not qualified. But Aunt Marin... And there's something else. Marin pulled a folder from the drawer by the fridge, hidden under takeout menus. Inside were bills, medical bills, insurance denial letters stamped in red, past due notices. What are these? Julian's treatments, the ones insurance won't cover because they're labeled experimental or unproven. Cochlear implant adjustments, specialist consultations, behavioral therapies. Marin's voice dropped. I've been paying them. Lorelei's eyes widened. How? I took out a loan against my house, the one your grandma left me. Marin's voice cracked. Mr. Drake doesn't know. The billing department sends them to me directly because I handle the household accounts. If he finds out, he'd fire you. Worse, he'd feel guilty, and Cassian Drake doesn't handle guilt well. He solves problems by throwing money at them or cutting people out, and if he cuts us out... Marin looked at Julian, tapping his rhythm at the table. Who will see this boy? Who will notice what he's trying to say? Lorelei looked at the bills, hundreds of thousands of dollars in red ink, then at Julian, whose fingers had stilled when her humming stopped. Aunt Marin, I think Julian's not broken. I think we've just been listening wrong. Marin closed the folder. The papers rustled like dry leaves. Maybe, but we can't prove that. Not in time. Not before April 15th. Not before they take everything. The hospital's PR office smelled like fresh ink and panic. Cassian sat across from two people he'd never wanted to meet. The PR director, a woman in her 40s with the exhausted efficiency of someone managing disasters daily, and a board member, silver-haired and stone-faced. The PR director turned her laptop toward him. On the screen, analytics scrolled past. Mr. Drake, the video has been viewed 2.4 million times. It's been picked up by 6 tabloid outlets, 3 parenting blogs, and a disability advocacy group that's using it to critique cure culture. The video played on loop. Julian sitting alone at his birthday party, the awkward silence, parents checking phones, the clown giving up. Someone had added a caption in bold white letters, "When 50 Elam can't buy a miracle." Who filmed this? A guest. We're trying to identify them, but it was posted anonymously through a burner account. The PR director's fingers drummed against the desk. It's gone viral in the worst possible way. The board member leaned forward. His cologne was too strong, filling the small office. Mr. Drake, we need to discuss Section 4.2b of your donor contract. I know the contract. Then you know that your naming rights to the pediatric wing are contingent on demonstrable outcomes aligned with the center's mission statement, advancing pediatric health through innovative treatment and measurable results. My son is receiving treatment. 27 failed interventions is not measurable results, Mr. Drake. It's a liability. And now, with this video, it's a public relations nightmare. The board member's voice was flat, businesslike. Parents are asking, if the millionaire donor's son can't be helped, why should we trust the hospital with our children? Cassian's jaw tightened. What are you saying? We're saying that at the April 15th board meeting, you will present evidence of Julian's progress. Standardized audiometric assessment showing improvement, verbal communication, something quantifiable. The board member slid a folder across the desk. If you cannot, we will rescind naming rights and pursue misrepresentation damages under Section 4.2b. How much? The board member didn't blink. $12 million, plus legal fees. The room tilted. Cassian had spent $50 million building that wing, the Drake Center for Pediatric Miracles, his legacy, his son's future. And now they wanted $12 million back, not because the wing failed, but because his son had. The PR director spoke again, softer now. Mr. Drake, there's one more thing. Someone leaked your home address. Paparazzi have been parked outside since yesterday morning. She clicked to a new tab. Photos appeared on screen, his townhouse, the service entrance, Marin carrying groceries, and Lorelei, 11 years old, her face caught in sharp focus as she entered through the side door. We're seeing photos of your housekeeper, your kitchen, even your niece, is it? Cassian's head snapped up. What? Young black girl, 11 or 12, seen entering through your service entrance. Tabloids are speculating she's a secret therapy consultant or some new age healer. It's absurd, but it's trending. That's my housekeeper's niece. She helps with cleaning after school. Then, we recommend limiting household access to essential staff only. No unauthorized visitors, no family members of staff unless absolutely necessary. The PR director closed her laptop with a decisive click. The last thing we need is more speculation, or more videos. Cassian stood. The chair scraped against the floor. You want me to ban a child from my house because tabloids are vultures? We want you to protect your privacy and your son's dignity. The board member stood as well. April 15th, Mr. Drake. Measurable progress, or we move forward with contract enforcement. Chum-tumps. Cassian left the office. The hallway smelled like hospital disinfectant and floor wax. His phone was already in his hand, pulling up his security company's number. No unauthorized visitors, including staff family members. He told himself it was for Julian's protection, for privacy, for damage control. But the contract clause echoed in his head, $12 million, plus legal fees. Marin's house smelled like old wood and her mother's lavender sachets, still tucked in drawers 2 years after she'd died. Lorelei sat cross-legged on her narrow bed, the napkin with Julian's rhythm pattern spread out on her grandmother's quilt. She'd been staring at it for an hour, tracing the pattern with her finger, Tap, tap, pause, tap. 4 beats, pause, 3 beats, repeat. It wasn't random, it was language. Marin knocked softly on the doorframe. You should be doing homework. I am, kind of. Lorelei looked up. Aunt Marin, can I ask you something about Grandma? Marin settled onto the edge of the bed. The springs creaked. What do you want to know? You said she went deaf when she was 50, but she could still feel music, right? Like, she'd put her hand on the radio speaker and say she could hear it through her bones. She did. Marin smiled, but it was sad around the edges. She'd say music talks through your chest, not your ears. I never really understood what she meant. I think Julian does. Lorelei held up the napkin. He's been tapping this pattern since the birthday party. It matches the bass line from the music. Not the melody, the bass, the part you feel more than hear. Marin studied the pattern. Lorelei, honey, Mr. Drake called me today. He said you can't come to the house anymore. Security has your photo. If you're seen on property, I lose my job. Immediately. The words hung in the air like smoke. Because of the tabloids? Because of the hospital board? Because everything's falling apart and they need someone to blame. Marin's voice was tight. I'm sorry, baby. I know you wanted to help Julian, but wait. Lorelei jumped up and pulled her closet door open. On the top shelf, wrapped in an old pillowcase, was her grandmother's music box. She'd kept it for 2 years, too precious to play, too painful to look at most days. She unwrapped it carefully. The music box was small, hand-painted with faded flowers, the wind-up key on the side, tarnished but still functional. When her grandmother had showed it to her the last time, 3 weeks before she died, she'd said, "This belonged to my mother. When you wind it up, don't just listen. Feel it. Music lives in your bones, baby girl, not your ears." Lorelei had been 9 then, too young to understand, too young to ask the right questions before it was too late. Aunt Marin, can you get me into the house one more time? Just once? Lorelei, please, I need to give this to Julian. She held up the music box. The painted flowers caught the lamplight. Grandma said, music talks through your chest. What if that's what Julian's been trying to tell us? What if he's not deaf to everything? Just to the way we've been trying to reach him? Marin looked at the music box, then at her niece's face. So much like her mother's. So much like the woman who'd raised them both. If we get caught, we won't. If we do, I lose everything. The house, the job, everything. I know. Marin was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a car passed, headlights sweeping across the bedroom wall. Finally, she sighed. Tomorrow night, after Mr. Drake goes to his charity dinner, he'll be gone until 11. Lorelei hugged her aunt so hard the music box pressed between them. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We're both probably crazy. But crazy was better than watching Julian disappear into silence while everyone looked away. The service entrance lock clicked open so quietly Lorelei almost missed it. Marin held the door, one finger to her lips, and they slipped inside. The kitchen was dark, except for the under-cabinet lights Marin had left on. Just enough to see by, not enough to trigger the motion sensors in the main hall. The house smelled different at night. No coffee, no fresh flowers, just the faint scent of lemon cleaner and the cool air from the ventilation system humming through the walls. Julian's bedroom was on the second floor, east wing. They took the service stairs, each step carefully placed to avoid creaks. Lorelei's heart hammered against her ribs. The music box felt heavy in her hands. Marin eased Julian's door open. He was sitting up in bed, not sleeping, never sleeping well, his eyes open and unfocused in the dim glow of his nightlight. He wore dinosaur pajamas that were probably too young for an 8-year-old, but nobody had thought to buy him new ones. Lorelei crossed the room slowly, knelt beside his bed. Julian? It's Lorelei. From the kitchen. I brought you something. He didn't respond, didn't turn his head. She wound the music box. The mechanism clicked and whirred, familiar sounds from her childhood. Then the tinny lullaby began to play. Brahms, her grandmother had told her once, though Lorelei had never learned which one. Julian didn't react to the sound, but Lorelei remembered what her grandmother had said. Don't just listen, feel it. She placed the music box in Julian's hands. His fingers were limp at first, passive. But then, slowly, carefully, she guided his hands to press the music box against his chest, right over his heart. The lullaby played through the wooden box, and the vibrations traveled through his small body. For 3 full seconds, nothing happened. Then Julian's fingers tightened around the box. His eyes, unfocused for so long, seemed to sharpen just a fraction. And his face changed. Not a smile exactly, but a relaxation, a softening. The permanent tension that lived in his forehead, the blankness that made him look like a beautiful statue instead of a living boy, it eased, just a little, just enough. His fingers traced the edges of the music box, explored the wind-up key, pressed it harder against his chest like he was trying to pull the vibrations deeper into his body. Marin's hand flew to her mouth. Lorelei felt tears on her cheeks. "He's not deaf to sound," Lorelei whispered. "He's fluent in vibration." Julian's fingers began to tap against the music box in rhythm with the lullaby. Tap, tap, pause, tap. The same pattern from the birthday party. The same language nobody had thought to learn. The music box wound down. The lullaby faded. But Julian didn't let go. He held it against his chest like it was the most precious thing he'd ever been given. Because maybe it was. Maybe it was the first time in 8 years that someone had spoken to him in a language he could understand. Marin touched Lorelei's shoulder. "We need to go." "Can he keep it?" "Hide it. Under his pillow. If Mr. Drake finds it—" Lorelei gently tucked the music box under Julian's pillow. His hand reached after it, wanting to keep it close. "I'll come back," she promised, even though she didn't know if she could. "I'll find a way." They slipped out of the room, down the service stairs, out the door that locked behind them with a soft click. And in his bedroom, Julian Drake pressed his hand under his pillow, feeling the music box there. The first gift anyone had ever given him that made sense. The first conversation he'd ever had that wasn't about fixing him. The billing office smelled like stale coffee and paper dust. Marin sat in a plastic chair that squeaked every time she shifted her weight, holding an envelope she'd been staring at for 5 minutes without opening. The billing coordinator, a tired woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain, cleared her throat. "Miss Okonkwo, I'm sorry to call you in like this, but the situation has escalated." "I understand. I'm just waiting for—" "Your loan officer called us directly this morning." The coordinator slid a paper across the desk. "He wanted to verify the outstanding balance before approving your refinancing application." Marin's blood went cold. "He called here?" "He said he needed to confirm the medical debt amount, that you'd listed it as the reason for the loan modification." The coordinator's voice was gentle, but her eyes held something like pity. "Ms. Okonkwo, the balance on Julian Drake's account is $847,000, all of it marked as your personal guarantee." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Marin's hands were shaking. Did you tell Mr. Drake?" "Hospital policy requires us to notify the patient's guardian when third-party payments exceed $50,000. The coordinator pulled out another form. "Mr. Drake was copied on the correspondence we sent this morning." The room tilted. Everything Marin had been trying to protect, her job, her house, her ability to stay close to Julian, was unraveling in a billing office that smelled like old coffee. "There's something else." The coordinator pulled up a screen on her computer, but "Your insurance company sent a formal denial letter yesterday. They're classifying Julian's condition as untreatable under current medical standards. All future claims will be automatically rejected." "What does that mean?" "It means any additional treatments for Julian, specialist visits, therapies, medical devices will be out of pocket expenses." And she turned the monitor so Marin could see the letter. The word untreatable was stamped in red across the top. "I'm sorry. I know you've been trying to help this family." Marin stood. The chair scraped against the linoleum. "Thank you for telling me. Ms. Okonkwo, the balance is still due. If you need to set up a payment plan, I'll figure it out." But she didn't know how. She'd already borrowed against everything she owned. And now Cassian knew. By now, he'd seen the email. By now, he knew she'd been hiding $847,000 in medical debt. By now, he was deciding whether to forgive her or destroy her. Cassian was waiting in the kitchen when Marin arrived for her shift. He stood by the marble island with his arms crossed, the email printed out and laid flat on the counter between them. The paper looked too white, too stark against the dark stone. The kitchen smelled like nothing. No coffee, no cooking, just cold air and silence. "Sit down," Cassian said quietly. "Mr. Drake, I can explain." "Sit down." Marin sat, her hands folded in her lap. She'd known this moment was coming. She'd just hoped for more time. Cassian picked up the paper. His voice was flat, controlled. $847,000. You've been paying my son's medical bills for over a year without telling me. The insurance kept denying claims. You were so focused on finding the next specialist, the next treatment, I thought I could handle it quietly. You took out a loan against your house. The house your mother left you. The house you share with your niece. He set the paper down. His hand was trembling. Why? Because someone had to. I would have paid. Would you? Marin met his eyes. Mr. Drake, you've spent $50 million building a hospital wing with your name on it, but you didn't notice when the bills for your own son's care stopped coming to you. You didn't notice when insurance started denying every claim. You didn't notice because you were too busy looking for miracles. The words hung between them like broken glass. Cassian's jaw tightened. You should have told me. You're right. I should have. Marin's voice was steady now, calm. But I've worked for you for 6 years. I've watched you throw money at problems until they go away, or until the people trying to solve them burn out and leave. And I knew if you found out about the bills, you'd either pay them to erase the guilt or fire me for overstepping. Either way, Julian would lose the one person in this house who sees him as more than a problem to be solved. That's not fair, isn't it? Marin stood. Last week, your niece, my 11-year-old niece, spent 15 minutes with Julian, and he responded to her. Actually responded. But you banned her from this house because the hospital board told you to. You chose protecting your reputation over protecting your son's chance at connection. I chose protecting him from tabloids and speculation. You chose protecting yourself, Marin's voice cracked. And I understand that. You're scared. You're drowning. But Julian is the one paying the price. Cassian turned away, stared out the window at the city below. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. I don't know how to reach him. I know. Every specialist says the same thing. He's unreachable, and now the board wants measurable progress by April 15th, or they'll sue me for $12 million and take his name off the building I built for him. Then stop listening to specialists who measure the wrong things, Cassian turned back. I'm going to pay off your loan, all of it, and give you 6 months severance, but I can't have you working here anymore. Marin had known this was coming, but hearing it still felt like a punch to the chest. Mr. Drake, you overstepped. You made decisions about my son's care without my knowledge or consent. You put yourself in financial jeopardy without telling me. His voice was quiet, professional, the voice he used in boardrooms when he was firing executives. I'm grateful for everything you've done, but this working relationship is over. What about Julian? I'll hire a new care coordinator, someone qualified. Someone who won't see him. Marin picked up her purse. Someone who'll follow protocols and measure the wrong things and wonder why he keeps disappearing. She walked toward the service entrance, stopped at the door. Mr. Drake, there's a music box under Julian's pillow. My niece gave it to him last week. He sleeps with it pressed against his chest every night. Her voice was steady, sad. Before you throw it away, wind it up, and watch what he does. Really watch. She left. The door clicked shut behind her, and Cassian stood alone in his kitchen, smelling nothing, hearing nothing but the hum of the ventilation system and the weight of his own silence. Upstairs, Julian sat on his bed, pressing the music box against his chest. The one gift that made sense in a world that didn't. The one person who'd spoken his language was gone, and nobody was left who knew how to listen. Dr. Okafor's office smelled like peppermint tea and old medical journals. She sat at her desk long after the clinic had closed, surrounded by stacks of research papers she'd printed from university databases. The overhead lights hummed. Outside, February rain tapped against the window like fingers trying to get in. She couldn't stop thinking about Julian Drake's hands, the way his fingers had moved against the testing chair armrest. Tap, tap, pause, tap. Rhythm, pattern, language. What if we're testing the wrong sense? She'd crossed out that question 3 weeks ago. Too speculative, too unscientific, but it kept circling back, persistent as the rain. On her computer screen, she had 12 tabs open. Articles about bone conduction, studies on vibration perception in deaf individuals, case reports of people who'd lost their hearing but could still feel music through their skulls, their chests, their bones. One study caught her attention. Frequency perception via bone conduction pathways in prelingual deaf children. Published in a German medical journal. Sample size, 43 children. Results, 31 showed measurable response to bass frequencies, 125 to 250 Hz, transmitted through bone conduction devices placed on the temporal bone, not through the ear, through the skull itself. Dr. Okafor read the methodology section 3 times. The researchers had bypassed the cochlear implant entirely. They'd used tuning forks, simple, mechanical tuning forks placed directly on the skull, the clavicle, the sternum, and the children, deaf children, labeled unreachable by traditional audiometry, had responded, not to sound traveling through air, to vibration traveling through bone. She pulled out Julian's file. 27 failed interventions, every single one focused on auditory processing, cochlear implants, hearing aids, auditory verbal therapy, all predicated on the assumption that sound needed to enter through the ear, travel to the cochlea, stimulate the auditory nerve. But what if Julian's auditory nerve was fine? What if the problem was the pathway everyone kept trying to use? Dr. Okafor picked up her phone, put it down, picked it up again. What she was thinking about doing was not standard protocol. It wasn't FDA approved. It would require using hospital equipment after hours for an unauthorized test on a patient whose father had just fired his longtime caregiver and was under contract pressure to show measurable results. If she was wrong, she'd lose her medical license. If she was right, she might save a child who'd been locked in silence for 8 years. She dialed Cassian Drake's number. It rang 4 times before he answered. "Mr. Drake, this is Dr. Okafor. I need to run a test on Julian. We've run every test available. Not this one. Sir, I've been researching bone conduction pathways. There's evidence that some deaf children can perceive frequency vibrations through skeletal transmission rather than auditory processing. It's not hearing in the traditional sense. It's tactile frequency perception." Silence on the other end. Then, "You're saying my son might feel sound instead of hearing it?" "I'm saying we've never tested for that. Every assessment we've run assumes auditory nerve function. But if Julian's brain processes vibration as information through a different sensory pathway, we'd never know. Standard audiograms wouldn't detect it." "Is this approved?" "No, sir. It's experimental, and it would need to be done after hours because the hospital won't authorize it without board approval, which we don't have time to get before April 15th. More silence. Dr. Okafor heard something in the background, a sound like wood creaking. Then Cassian's voice, quieter now. "What do you need?" "Access to Julian, a tuning fork set, and 30 minutes in the soundproof booth." "When?" "Tonight, before I lose my nerve." Cassian's laugh was dry, humorless. "If this works, you'll have saved my son. If it doesn't, we'll both lose our careers." "Yes, sir. I'll bring him in an hour." Cassian stood outside Julian's bedroom door, listening. Inside, he could hear a faint mechanical clicking, the sound of something being wound up, over and over. He opened the door slowly. Julian sat on his bed in the dark, the music box in his hands, not playing it, just winding it up, feeling the mechanism click under his fingers, then pressing it against his chest as the tinny lullaby played through the wooden case. Cassian had found the music box a week ago, exactly where Marin said it would be, under Julian's pillow. He'd meant to throw it away. Unauthorized item, unauthorized visitor, another breach of the protocols he'd tried so hard to maintain. But then he'd watched Julian's face when the boy realized it was missing. Watched him search for it with his hands, patting the pillow, the blankets, the floor beside the bed. Watched the panic that crossed his features, the first real emotion Cassian had seen from his son in months, so he'd put it back. And every night since, Julian had wound it up, pressed it to his chest, tapped out rhythms against the wooden case. "Julian," Cassian said softly. The boy didn't respond, didn't turn his head, but his fingers stilled on the music box. "We're going to see Dr. Okafor. She wants to try something new." Cassian crossed the room, knelt beside the bed. He'd avoided touching Julian for so long, afraid of doing it wrong, afraid of making things worse. But now, he reached out and placed his hand on his son's shoulder. Julian's body tensed, then slowly relaxed. "I don't know if this will work," Cassian whispered. "I don't know if anything will work, but I'm tired of listening to people tell me you're unreachable. Because that girl, that 11-year-old girl I banned from this house, she reached you with a grandmother's music box. And if she could do that, maybe we've just been reaching wrong." Julian pressed the music box harder against his chest. The lullaby played on, mechanical and sweet, and Cassian helped his son into a coat, gathered the music box, Julian wouldn't let go of it, and together they walked to the car, father and son, bound by silence and the desperate hope that somewhere in that silence there was a language they'd just never learned to speak. The rain had stopped, the city was quiet, and somewhere in the dark a tuning fork was waiting to ask a question no one had thought to ask before. What if the boy, who couldn't hear, was still listening, just not with his ears? The clinic hallway smelled like floor wax and disinfectant. Dr. Okafor had left the lights off except for the ones in the soundproof booth, which glowed like an aquarium in the dark building. She'd laid out her equipment on the testing table: 3 tuning forks of different frequencies, a bone conduction device borrowed from the ENT department, and her own hands, steady for the first time in weeks. Cassian entered carrying Julian, who still clutched the music box against his chest. The boy's eyes were half closed, drowsy from the late hour, but his fingers hadn't stopped moving against the wooden case. Tap, tap, pause, tap. "Thank you for coming," Dr. Okafor said quietly. "Let's get him settled." They placed Julian in the testing chair. He didn't resist, but he didn't engage either. His body was limp, cooperative in the way objects are cooperative. Cassian stood behind the observation glass, his hand pressed against it like he was trying to reach through Oster. Okafor knelt in front of Julian. "I'm going to try something different tonight. No headphones, no speakers, just this." She held up a tuning fork, the largest one, designed to produce 128 Hz, a frequency so low it was more felt than heard. She struck it against her palm. The metal hummed, vibrating in her hand. Julian didn't react to the sound. His eyes stayed unfocused. But then Dr. Okafor did what the German study had suggested. She placed the base of the vibrating tuning fork directly against Julian's temple, against the bone. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then Julian's entire body went still. Not the passive stillness of disconnection, the active stillness of attention. His eyes sharpened, his head turned fractionally toward the tuning fork, and his hand, the one not holding the music box, reached up slowly and touched the metal. Dr. Okafor's breath caught. "Julian, can you feel that?" He couldn't hear her question, but his fingers traced the tuning fork, exploring the vibration like it was a word he recognized but hadn't heard in years. She pulled the fork away. His hand followed it, reaching. She struck it again, placed it against his other temple. Julian's fingers tapped against the chair armrest. Tap, tap, pause, tap, matching the frequency of the fork. Behind the glass, Cassian's hand slid down the window. He was crying. Dr. Okafor worked quickly, methodically. She tested different frequencies, higher tones. Julian barely reacted. Middle range, some response. But the base frequencies, the ones that lived below 250 Hz, the ones most people felt in their chests at concerts, those lit him up. She placed the tuning fork against his clavicle, his sternum, the back of his skull. Each time, Julian's hands moved to the spot, pressing, feeling, trying to capture the vibration. "He's not processing sound," Dr. Okafor whispered into the observation microphone. "He's processing vibration through bone conduction pathways. Mr. Drake, your son isn't deaf to everything. He's just been listening with a sense we never thought to test." She picked up the bone conduction device, a small electronic unit with a contact pad, turned it on, adjusted it to produce a rhythmic pulse at 200 Hz, placed the pad against Julian's hand. The pulse traveled through his bones, and Julian's face transformed. Not a smile, not yet, but recognition, understanding, the look of someone who'd been speaking a language alone in the dark and just heard someone speak it back. He took the device from her hands, pressed it against his chest, his neck, his forehead, exploring, learning. His fingers tapped out responses, complex rhythms, variations on the patterns she was giving him. It was conversation, primitive, mechanical, but conversation. Dr. Okafor recorded everything: frequency responses, behavioral observations, the exact patterns Julian produced, data, evidence, proof that could stand up in a boardroom or a medical journal, proof that Julian Drake had been speaking all along. The world had just been deaf to him. The administrator's office smelled like bitter coffee and leather furniture. Dr. Okafor sat across from a woman who looked like she hadn't slept, holding a folder marked "Incident Report" in red letters. "Dr. Okafor, you used hospital equipment after hours for an unapproved experimental procedure on a high-profile patient. I documented everything. The results are in my report." "Your report is irrelevant." The administrator's voice was clipped, efficient. "You violated protocol. The medical board has been notified. You'll receive a formal hearing notice within 48 hours. But the data shows you conducted an unauthorized test using borrowed equipment on a minor without proper consent documentation." The administrator slid a paper across the desk. "This is your suspension notice. Effective immediately, pending ethics review." Dr. Okafor's hands shook as she picked up the paper. I found a way to communicate with a child everyone said was unreachable. You also violated hospital policy, potentially exposed us to malpractice liability, and gave false hope to a family already under extreme stress. False hope? Dr. Okafor stood, her voice rising. I have video documentation of Julian Drake responding to bone conduction frequencies. He's not unreachable. We've just been reaching with the wrong tools. And now a board member has leaked your unauthorized tests to the media. The administrator turned her computer screen around. The headline glowed, "Desperate Doctor Violates Protocol on Millionaire's Deaf Son." The article was already trending. Comments poured in, some supportive, most skeptical. Another quack promising miracles. Rich people getting special treatment again. When will they accept that some kids can't be fixed? Someone on the board wants your findings buried, Dr. Okafor said quietly. Because if bone conduction communication works, it means 27 specialists failed, not because Julian was hopeless, but because the entire system was asking the wrong questions. The administrator's expression didn't change. Clear out your office by end of day. The hearing will determine if you keep your license. Dr. Okafor left the office. The hallway stretched ahead of her, fluorescent and empty. She'd known this was coming, known the risk, but she'd also seen Julian's face when he felt that tuning fork, seen recognition, understanding, hope. She pulled out her phone and texted Cassie and Drake. They suspended me. Medical board hearing in 48 hours, but the data is real. Julian can communicate through vibration. Don't let them bury this. His response came immediately. They won't. I promise. Because Cassian had seen it too, had watched through observation glass as his son, his unreachable, unfixable son, had reached back, had answered, had shown everyone that he'd been speaking all along in a frequency no one had bothered to learn. And if the hospital board wanted to bury that truth to protect their reputation, they'd forgotten something important. Cassie and Drake hadn't built a $50 million hospital wing by backing down from fights. The April 15th board meeting was 2 weeks away. And he finally had something to show them. Not a cure, not a miracle. Just his son's voice, speaking in vibrations instead of words. And data proving that sometimes the problem isn't the child, it's everyone who claims to be listening. Dr. Okafor's apartment smelled like cardboard boxes and regret. She sat on her couch, surrounded by files she'd brought home from the clinic, everything she could carry before security escorted her out. Her medical license sat in a frame on the coffee table, and she kept staring at it like it might disappear. The knock on her door came at 8 in the morning. She opened it to find a man in an expensive suit holding a leather portfolio. Dr. Okafor, I'm Richard Chen, legal counsel for the hospital's medical board. He didn't wait for an invitation, just walked past her into the living room. May I sit? She nodded, numb. He opened his portfolio with practiced efficiency. The board has reviewed your case. We're prepared to offer you a resolution that avoids a formal hearing. What kind of resolution? You submit a written retraction of your findings regarding Julian Drake. You state that the bone conduction responses were misinterpreted due to fatigue and confirmation bias. You acknowledge the test was conducted improperly and that the results are scientifically unsound. He slid a document across the coffee table. In exchange, we drop all ethics charges. Your license remains intact. Your employment can be reinstated within 6 months at a different facility. Dr. Okafor picked up the document. The words blurred together, misinterpreted, confirmation bias, scientifically unsound. And if I don't sign? The medical board proceeds with formal discipline. Best case scenario, you receive a 2-year suspension and mandatory retraining. Worst case, permanent license revocation. Chen's voice was neutral, professional. Dr. Okafor, you're 34 years old. You have your entire career ahead of you. Don't throw it away over one improperly conducted test. It wasn't improper. It was necessary. That's not what the board will determine. Chen leaned forward. Between you and me, this isn't really about protocol violations. It's about the Drake family donor contract. If your findings are validated, it proves that 27 specialists, many of whom sit on hospital boards or consult for our institution, failed to identify a treatable pathway. The liability exposure alone could cost millions. The reputational damage could be catastrophic. So you want me to lie. I want you to be pragmatic. Chin stood, smoothing his suit jacket. You have 72 hours to decide. After that, the board moves forward with formal proceedings. He left. The door clicked shut, and Dr. Okafor sat alone with the retraction document in her hands and her medical license staring at her from the coffee table. 27 specialists had failed Julian Drake. She'd been number 28, and now she had a choice: protect her career by declaring him unreachable, or protect the truth and lose everything she'd worked for. Outside, March rain started to fall. The sound on her window reminded her of Julian's fingers tapping. Tap, tap, pause, tap. A language nobody wanted to acknowledge because admitting it existed meant admitting they'd been deaf all along. Cassian's home office smelled like whiskey and old books. He sat at his desk with Julian's napkin spread out in front of him, the one Lorelei had saved from the birthday party in January. The rhythm pattern drawn in dried juice: 4 beats, pause, 3 beats, repeat. He'd found it that afternoon while looking for Dr. Okafor's contact information. It had fallen out of a folder of hospital bills, this crumpled napkin that an 11-year-old girl had kept because she'd seen what 27 specialists had missed. His son had been speaking since January, maybe longer, and everyone, including him, especially him, had been too busy trying to fix Julian to actually listen. Cassian picked up his phone, dialed. Marin answered on the 3rd ring. "Mr. Drake, I need Lorelei at the board meeting, April 15th. I need her to help Julian demonstrate the bone conduction communication." His voice was rough, uncertain. "Marin, I know I have no right to ask. I fired you. I banned your niece from my house. I spent 6 years treating you like staff instead of family. But Julian responds to her in ways he doesn't respond to anyone else. And if I'm going to stand in front of that board and prove my son can communicate, I need her help." Silence on the other end. Long enough that Cassian thought she might have hung up. Then, "Why should I let my niece anywhere near you? You threw us away the moment we became inconvenient." "Because you're right. About everything. I've been drowning in guilt and desperation, and I turned both into weapons against the people trying to help." Cassian's voice cracked. "I spent $50 million building a hospital wing with my name on it. But I couldn't see that my housekeeper was bankrupting herself to pay my son's bills. I couldn't see that an 11-year-old child understood Julian better than any specialist. I couldn't see my own son standing right in front of me, speaking a language I was too arrogant to learn. Mr. Drake, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to help me do one thing right." He picked up the napkin. "Julian's been trying to talk since January. Maybe longer. This napkin proves it. Lorelei saw it. She's the only one who saw it. And if we're going to convince a boardroom full of people who want to bury the truth, I need the girl who kept this napkin because she believed my son was worth listening to." More silence. Then Marin's voice, softer now. "What time?" 2 o'clock. April 15th. "We'll be there. But Mr. Drake, when this is over, when you've won your board meeting and saved your reputation, you don't get to disappear on Julian again. You don't get to hire more specialists and more caregivers and delegate his life to people you pay. He's your son. Start acting like it." "I will, I promise." "Good, because Lorelei's not doing this for you. She's doing it for him. Don't make her regret it." Marin hung up. Cassian set down the phone and stared at the napkin, at the pattern his son had tapped out while 20 guests ignored him and 2 million people watched a video that turned his silence into spectacle. Julian had been saying, "I'm here, I'm listening, can anyone hear me?" And for 8 years, the answer had been no. But on April 15th, in front of a boardroom that wanted to erase both his son and the doctor who'd proven everyone wrong, Cassian was going to make sure the answer was finally, unequivocally, yes. He pulled out his laptop and started writing. Not a presentation, a confession. "My name is Cassian Drake. I built a hospital wing for pediatric miracles, but I was too blind to see that my son didn't need a miracle. He needed a father willing to learn his language." The words came slowly, painfully, but they came. And by the time dawn broke over the city, Cassian had something he'd never had before. Not a cure, not a solution, not a way to fix his son, just the truth, raw and humbling and real, and sometimes the truth was the only miracle that mattered. The boardroom smelled like furniture polish and fear. 23 board members sat around an oak table that could seat 30, their faces carefully neutral, their folders precisely aligned. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, cherry blossoms were blooming, pink against gray sky, spring fighting through the last of winter. Cassian stood at the head of the table with Julian beside him. His son wore a collared shirt that Cassian had buttoned wrong twice before getting it right. The music box sat on the table in front of them, and Julian's hand rested protectively on top of it. Dr. Okafor sat in the back row with her attorney, her medical license hanging in the balance. Marin and Lorelei stood near the door, technically observers, technically unauthorized, but Cassian had insisted. The board chair, a silver-haired woman named Patricia Vance, cleared her throat. Mr. Drake, we've gathered to review your donor contract compliance. Per Section 4, 2B, you were to demonstrate measurable progress in your son's treatment by today's date. The floor is yours. Cassian stepped forward. His hands were shaking, so he gripped the edge of the table. I brought the standard evidence you requested. Audiometric assessments, speech therapy evaluations, developmental benchmarks. He slid a folder across the table. Every single one shows zero progress. By the metrics we've been using, my son remains profoundly deaf and nonverbal, unreachable. Murmurs rippled through the room. The board members exchanged glances. Patricia Vance opened the folder, scanned the pages, and nodded to the lawyer beside her. Mr. Drake, per the contract terms, but those metrics are measuring the wrong thing. Cassian's voice cut through the room. For 8 years, we've been trying to make my son hear through his ears, testing his auditory nerve, measuring decibels and frequencies transmitted through air and cochlear pathways. And by those standards, he's failed. But Dr. Imani Okafor discovered something 3 weeks ago that 27 specialists missed. He gestured toward Dr. Okafor. She discovered my son isn't deaf to everything. He's deaf to sound transmitted through air, but he can perceive vibration transmitted through bone. He's been communicating all along. We were just listening with the wrong sense. A board member spoke up, Dr. Marcus Hill, one of the audiologists who'd treated Julian 2 years ago. Mr. Drake, we're all sympathetic to your situation, but bone conduction claims have been investigated before. They're largely anecdotal, difficult to replicate, and Then let me demonstrate. Cassian turned to Lorelei. This is Lorelei Winters. She's 11 years old. She gave my son a music box 8 weeks ago. She's the first person he's responded to in 8 years. Not because she has medical training, not because she used expensive equipment, because she understood something everyone in this room missed. Lorelei walked to the table slowly, her worn sneakers silent on the thick carpet. She stood beside Julian and placed her hand on his shoulder. He didn't flinch, didn't pull away. May I? She asked Cassian quietly. He nodded. Lorelei wound the music box. The mechanism clicked, loud, in the silent boardroom. The lullaby began to play, tinny, mechanical, simple. Julian didn't react to the sound. His eyes stayed unfocused, but Lorelei lifted the music box and pressed it against Julian's chest, against his sternum, and Julian's entire body changed. His hand rose to touch the box, his fingers traced its edges, and his other hand began to tap against the table. Tap, tap, pause, tap, matching the rhythm of the lullaby. He's not hearing it, Lorelei said softly. He's feeling it, through his bones, and he's answering back. Patricia Vance leaned forward. That's a reflexive response. Tactile stimulation. It's not communication. Then watch this. Dr. Okafor stood, her attorney placing a warning hand on her arm, which she ignored. She crossed to the table and pulled out a tuning fork from her bag, struck it against her palm. The metal hummed at 200 Hz. She placed the base against Julian's temple. Julian's head turned toward the vibration. His fingers stopped tapping, started again, slower, matching the frequency of the fork, not the rhythm this time, the actual vibration pattern. Dr. Okafor pulled the fork away. Julian's hand reached after it, searching. She struck it again, placed it on the table itself. The wood transmitted the vibration across the surface. Julian placed both hands flat on the table, felt the vibration traveling through the oak, and then he did something nobody expected. He began conducting. His hands moved in patterns, tapping different spots on the table, creating rhythms, responding to the fork's frequency with variations of his own. It wasn't random. It wasn't reflexive. It was conversational. Question and answer, call and response. Lorelei watched him, then placed her hands on the table too, tapped out a pattern, 4 beats, pause, 3 beats. Julian's hands stilled, then he tapped back. 3 beats, pause, 4 beats, a mirror, an answer. That's the rhythm from his birthday party, Cassian whispered. From January. She saved it on a napkin. He pulled the crumpled paper from his pocket, held it up so the board could see the juice-stained pattern. My son has been trying to talk since at least January, maybe longer, but we were all too deaf to hear him. Dr. Marcus Hill stood. This is highly irregular. It's measurable communication. Dr. Okafor's voice rang through the boardroom. I have 3 weeks of documented responses, video evidence, frequency analysis. Julian Drake perceives vibrations between 125 and 300 Hz transmitted through bone conduction pathways. He responds with rhythmic patterns that show intention, variation, and reciprocity. That's language. It's just not auditory language. She conducted those tests illegally, another board member said. She conducted them correctly. Cassian's voice was steel. Every other test was illegal. Illegal because they measured the wrong thing, failed my son, and allowed everyone in this room to write him off as hopeless. Dr. Okafor was the first person with the courage to ask a different question. Patricia Vance was quiet for a long moment. She looked at Julian, whose hands were still resting on the table, waiting. She looked at Lorelei, 11 years old in worn sneakers, who'd seen what 27 specialists had missed. She looked at the napkin with its juice-stained rhythm. Dr. Okafor, can this communication method be standardized, taught, replicated? Yes. With proper bone conduction devices and vibration-based communication protocols? Yes. Dr. Okafor's voice was steady. Julian's not unique. There are likely hundreds of children labeled unreachable who could communicate this way if we tested for it. Then we're not discussing contract compliance anymore. Patricia's voice shifted, still professional, but softer now. We're discussing whether this hospital is willing to pioneer a new communication methodology. Whether the Drake Center for Pediatric Miracles is actually willing to recognize miracles when they don't look like we expected. She turned to the lawyer beside her. Table the contract enforcement discussion. I want a proposal on my desk within 2 weeks for integrating bone conduction communication assessment into our standard pediatric audiology protocols. Murmurs erupted around the table. Some board members nodded, others looked furious. Dr. Marcus Hill stood and walked out, his face red. But Patricia Vance was still looking at Julian, who had picked up the music box again and was pressing it against his chest like a talisman. Mr. Drake, your naming rights remain, on one condition. Anything. Change the name. Drake Center for Pediatric Miracles implies we're looking for cures, for fixes. But your son doesn't need fixing, he needs witnesses. People willing to learn his language. She gestured toward Lorelei. What would you call it? Cassian looked at his son, at the girl with the worn sneakers, at the music box that had started everything. The Drake Center for Pediatric Communication, because communication doesn't require words, it just requires someone willing to listen. One board member stood, then another, not unanimous, but enough. Applause broke out, scattered, tentative, but real, and Julian, still pressing the music box to his chest, tapped out a rhythm on the table. Not the pattern from the birthday party. Something new. Something that sounded almost like joy. Lorelei tapped back. And for the first time in 8 years, Julian Drake smiled. The hospital wing smelled like fresh paint and possibility. Cassian stood in front of the donor wall, where his name had been engraved in brass 3 years ago. A work crew was carefully removing the old plaque, and beside him, the new one waited on a cloth-covered table. The Drake Center for Pediatric Communication, founded by Cassian Drake, in honor of Julian Drake and all the children who speak languages. We're still learning to hear. Dr. Okafor stood beside him, her medical license restored, her suspension expunged from the record. The hospital had offered her department head of the new Bone Conduction Communication Research Division. She'd accepted on the condition that she could hire her own team, people who knew how to ask questions nobody else was asking. The first devices arrive next week, she said quietly. Custom bone conduction units. We'll start with 12 children currently labeled nonverbal. See how many of them have been talking all along. In the training protocols? 6 audiologists signed up, 2 speech therapists, 1 occupational therapist. Dr. Okafor smiled. Word spreads fast when you prove the impossible is just the untested. Marin approached from the hallway, carrying a box. Inside was the music box, nestled in archival foam. Where do you want this? Cassian gestured toward a glass display case being installed beside the new plaque. There, where everyone can see it. The music box was placed carefully inside. A small placard was mounted below it. This music box, given by Lorelei Winters to Julian Drake, demonstrated that communication transcends traditional sensory pathways. Sometimes the greatest breakthroughs come not from laboratories, but from the willingness to meet someone in their language. She should be here for this, Marin said. She's in school, where she belongs. Cassian pulled an envelope from his pocket. But I wanted to give you this. For her college fund, she earned it. Marin opened the envelope. The check inside made her hand fly to her mouth. Mr. Drake, this is not nearly enough. Your niece saved my son's life. Or rather, she showed me he was living all along, and I'd been too blind to see it. Cassian's voice was rough. The loan against your house has been paid off. Your position here is permanent, with a raise and full benefits, and Lorelei has a full scholarship to any university she chooses when the time comes. It's already endowed. You didn't have to... Yes, I did. He met her eyes. You spent a year bankrupting yourself because someone had to see Julian as more than a problem to solve. You were right, about everything, and I'm sorry it took me so long to hear you. Marin wiped her eyes. Julian's waiting for you in the garden. He wanted to be outside today. The garden smelled like cherry blossoms and wet earth. Spring had finally arrived in full. Warm sun, new leaves, the sound of birds testing their voices after winter. Julian sat on a bench beneath a cherry tree, wearing a small device clipped onto his collar, the bone conduction communicator Dr. Okafor had designed specifically for him. Lorelei sat beside him, tapping rhythms on the wooden bench. Julian tapped back, conversation in a language that required no words, just patience and attention, and the willingness to feel instead of hear. Cassian watched from the garden entrance, not wanting to interrupt. He'd spent 8 years trying to pull Julian into his world. It had taken an 11-year-old girl to teach him that he needed to enter Julian's world instead. Lorelei saw him and waved. Mr. Drake, come here. Julian wants to show you something. Cassian crossed the garden and knelt beside the bench. Julian's eyes were still unfocused, still seeing nothing in the traditional sense. But his attention was sharp, present, there in a way it hadn't been before. Lorelei placed Cassian's hand flat on the bench. Tap something, anything. Cassian tapped out a simple rhythm. 3 beats, pause, 2 beats. Julian's hand found his father's, pressed against it, and then Julian tapped back. Not the same pattern, but a response, a variation. 4 beats, pause, 1 beat. He's answering you, Lorelei said softly. He's been answering all along. You just had to learn how to ask. Cassian felt tears on his face. He tapped again. Julian tapped back. Not words, not sentences, but communication. Real, intentional, human communication between father and son. I'm sorry, Cassian whispered, knowing Julian couldn't hear him. But Lorelei was there, so he said it anyway. I'm sorry it took me so long to listen. He placed his other hand on Julian's shoulder. His son didn't pull away. And there, beneath the cherry blossoms with petals falling around them like snow, Cassian Drake finally learned the language his son had been speaking for 8 years. It wasn't in words. It wasn't in the frequencies that traveled through air and entered through ears and processed in the ways every textbook said they should. It was in vibration, in rhythm, in the patient tapping of small hands against wood and bone, in the space between silence and sound. Lorelei stood to leave, but Julian's hand reached for hers, held on. I think he wants you to stay, Cassian said. I think he wants us to keep talking, Lorelei replied, and she sat back down and tapped out a new rhythm, something complex, something that made Julian's face light up with concentration as he worked out his response. And Cassian watched his son talk for the first time, not with words, not with sounds, but with the language he'd invented alone in silence, waiting 8 years for someone to learn it. The cherry blossoms fell, the sun warmed the bench, and 3 people sat together in a garden speaking a language that required no ears, just hands and hearts in the revolutionary act of meeting someone where they were instead of demanding they come to you. The music box sat in its display case inside, behind glass, a testament to the moment everything changed. But the real miracle was happening here, in the garden, where a father finally heard his son say, I'm here, I've always been here. Thank you for finally learning how to listen. And the answer, tapped out slowly, imperfectly, but with all the love Cassian had never known how to express, was simply, I'm listening now, and I'll never stop. Now, here's the thing about silence. In a house that big, it's never really quiet. Money hums. It vibrates through expensive appliances, through climate control systems keeping every room at exactly 72 degrees, through security systems that never sleep. Cassian Drake lived in that hum for 8 years and called it silence. Called his son silent too. But Julian was never silent. He was just speaking a frequency nobody was willing to learn. I've been thinking about what it means to listen, really listen. Not the polite kind where you wait for your turn to talk, not the diagnostic kind where you're checking symptoms against textbooks, but the kind where you empty yourself out and let someone else's language fill the space. That's what Lorelei did with a grandmother's music box and muddy sneakers and the kind of wisdom that comes from losing someone, before you learned their language. She'd lived with that regret, never learning to sign with her grandmother before the woman died. So, when she met Julian, she paid attention. She asked, "What is he saying that we're not hearing?" Turns out, he was saying plenty. Tap, tap, pause, tap. A whole vocabulary in vibration, a language living in his bones while everyone kept shouting into his ears. By April, those cherry blossoms were blooming outside the hospital. Funny how rebirth works. It doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It comes quiet, on petals falling, in the first warm day after a long winter. Julian got his rebirth too, not because someone fixed him, because someone finally admitted he was never broken, just fluent in a language the rest of us were too arrogant to study. Dr. Okafor kept her license, started a whole research division on bone conduction communication. Last I heard, they'd identified 43 children in 3 states who'd been labeled nonverbal, but were actually just speaking in frequencies below 300 Hz. 43 children who'd been living in isolation because the world decided if you can't speak English, you can't speak at all. Marin got her house paid off, got her dignity back, got to watch her niece become the kind of hero who doesn't wear capes, just worn sneakers and a heart big enough to see past everyone else's blindness. And Cassian, he learned what $50 million couldn't buy: humility. The willingness to kneel down beside your son and ask him to teach you his language instead of forcing him to learn yours. That's the real miracle. Not the bone conduction devices or the research protocols or the renamed hospital wing. The miracle is a father putting his hand on a bench beside his son's hand and learning to feel instead of fix. Some languages don't need sound. They just need someone willing to stop talking long enough to notice what's already being said. Julian was speaking all along. The world was just deaf to him. Until a girl with a music box asked the question nobody else had thought to ask: what if we're listening wrong? And sometimes, that's all it takes. One person willing to learn. One moment of humility in a world that prizes certainty. One child refusing to believe that silence means empty. If you've ever opened a door for someone, not with money, not with power, just with the willingness to meet them in their language, tell me about it. Tell me what you heard when you finally stopped trying to make them speak yours. Because that's how the world changes. Not with grand gestures, not with buildings bearing your name, but with small hands tapping rhythms on wooden benches under cherry trees saying, "I'm here. I've been here all along. Thank you for finally learning how to listen. And the only answer that matters is I'm listening now."